Don't butt!
Who do you think you're fooling? I just saw you. Wait.
Get off him! What the hell are you running too! I'm going to jail!
Nowadays, James Gunn is known for his work in Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, which is currently ongoing but almost done, and most recently, he's dipped his toes into the DC universe with the most recent Suicide Squad movie and the Peacemaker TV series. However, there is going to be more spin-offs for that, so his universe there isn't done quite yet. And a lot of people think that in 2014, when the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie came out, that was his first superhero movie that he ever wrote and directed. But I'm here to tell you, you're wrong, because 4 years before, as a small director, at this point in time, his only really, big thing in his resume was he wrote both of the Scooby-Doo movies, and he had directed a horror movie called Slither. Other than that, his second directorial feature was a superhero movie called, Super. It only had a $2.5 million budget and was more a independent film than anything else. However, the cast in this movie was definitely something. We have Rainn Wilson of Office fame playing the main character Frank, who, after thinking that his wife, played by Liv Tyler, was kidnapped by Kevin Bacon, who plays a character named Jock, he decides that he's going to take matters into his own hands and become the superhero, the Crimson Bolt. Now, it's kind of more like the Batman type. He doesn't have any powers. He just kind of goes around with gadgets, mostly a wrench, and just beats the shit out of anybody who breaks the law. And that can be anything from cutting the line, littering, all this kind of stuff. Some of the people he beats up deserves it, like a child molester, that's one of the things I think he did well there, but, I think with James Gunn's intent for this, it was to be its own thing, obviously. I mean, he just made this character up, this story up. This isn't like any character from a comic book. This is his interpretation of it, and I think it was more a parody more than anything. Not to say he hates comic book movies, obviously. I mean, look at what he's done now throughout his career, now that he's more renowned, but it was more of a parody, I guess, on just how silly and predictable some of them can be, that he decided to flip the page and do his own thing and show you how it's done. And if you watch the new Suicide Squad movie and watch this movie, you'll see that a lot of the violence is exactly the same. I mean, from heads getting blown off,
I'm the one who called you!
Bloody gore, you realize right away that this is an R-rated movie. It starts slow, I'm not gonna lie. The first 30 minutes I was sitting there going, something's gotta happen or else I'm turning this movie off. And I don't do that often. But once he starts becoming the Crimson Bolt and figuring stuff out, it becomes more interesting, it becomes more fun, and throughout this time, we end up finding out Kevin Bacon may be trying to harm Frank's wife. He still doesn't know. He's still trying to figure things out. And throughout this time, there is this person who works at the comic book store, Libby, who is played by Elliot Page, which back then he was going by Ellen Page. So before I confuse anybody with that, that's who that is. That's who I'm talking about. And I'm going to call him Elliot because that's what he wants to go by now, and I don't want to misgender him for the sake of cancel culture. So during this time, Libby finds out that Frank is the Crimson Bolt as he keeps coming into the store, asking for certain comics for things, and she just kind of starts putting two and two together, to the point where she asks if she can be his sidekick, and he kept saying, no, hesitating, but in the end, he ends up letting it happen, and Libby goes by the superhero name Bolty, which, I mean, I guess it's supposed to be cheap, it's supposed to be funny, because it's just funny that it's that simple, and basically, her problem is, she doesn't have any self-control, whereas Frank does have anger issues. He's learned to kind of keep them in check for the most part, but she's loud, she's obnoxious, and her urge is to just kill, whereas Frank doesn't want to kill. He just likes beating the shit out of people for justice purposes and all that kind of stuff, and he's still, trying to train her and all this, and, you do kind of get to like the character of Libby as the story goes on. Now, there is an awkward sex scene between Libby and Frank that can get a little awkward, but before it happens, James Gunn would just like to clarify that Libby is 22 years old, so it's not like it's like anything questionable. It's still weird weird because Frank is supposed to be 10 or so years older than Libby, but again, I don't know. I guess they just had to throw that in there. It's a little minor sex scene. Nothing really happens other than a lot of grinding and moaning, but it was just weird to throw that in there, but it kind of started to show the reason they started to trust each other. They just became more attached and felt more together at that point in time. But, of course, with every James Gunn movie, there's gotta be a character that you end up liking that ends up dying.
He may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy.
During their final fight going in to save Frank's wife, Libby gets shot in the face. Her whole side of her face was like literally blown off. And of course, this pisses Black Bolt off that he just goes on a rampage. He goes in there and he ends up killing Michael Rooker's character. He's one of the henchmen to Kevin Bacon's character, along with Sean Gunn, James Gunn's brother, as he tends to get involved with his brother's stuff, whether it's small parts or big parts. He plays a big part in Guardians of the Galaxy as Yondu's right-hand man, and of course in the most recent Suicide Squad movie he was Weasel and Calendar Man, so small parts there, but he still gets in. But in this one, he's used a lot more, probably because James Gunn couldn't really afford to hire a whole bunch of big actors, so he just had to go with what he had there. And we come to find out that Kevin Bacon didn't really kidnap Frank's wife. Frank's wife willingly left because she was in a secret relationship with him, because one of the main things about his wife is that she's a recovering drug addict, and she had been making it out like she's been drug-free for a while since they got married. But it turns out she goes to Jock to get drugs because he is a drug dealer, and you know, all that. But, you know, he ends up killing Kevin Bacon, and for a while, it looks like Frank and his wife's relationship are gonna be okay. For a couple months, she decided to stay and console him over, you know, the loss of his sidekick and just all this other stuff, but they end up kind of, you know, going their separate ways, and they do stay friends as later down the line Frank's now ex-wife does get married, has 4 children with that guy, but she lets Frank see the kids and they call him Uncle Frank and everything's happy. Now he realizes his purpose as being the Crimson Bolt. They never really state if he gave it up or he kept going, but I think you're supposed to insinuate that he kept going with things, and that's where the movie ends, kind of on it's a sad high note. It's like every James Gunn film, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Funny as hell, great movie, but when Yondu died, that was like it. Or when Groot died in the first movie, it's just the way he goes about doing these things, it's very, very, very risky. But it always pays off for him in the end. Or even some of the characters he killed in the Suicide Squad. Like, I loved the evolution of Polka Dot Man as a character. Excuse me. Ugh. I choked on my spit. Like, I like the evolution of Polka Dot Man's character and the fact that at the end, he finally realizes that he can do good and he is good, and he screams out, "I'm a superhero." It was like, yes, yes, finally he's feeling that happiness, and then he just gets squashed.
I'm a superhero! I'm a motherfucking super...
No. Wait. Wait.
In your head, it's like, it sucks that he's gone, but in the end, he went out realizing that he's not a bad guy, he's not a psychopath, he's not weird, he is a real hero, and James Gunn just does a good job of taking these characters that you're not really supposed to like and making you like them, and then making you upset to the fact that he killed them off in the end. So overall, with Super, you're in for a R-rated bloody adventure with profanity and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's a typical James Gunn R-rated flick. Like, I bet you if Guardians of the Galaxy was able to be R-rated, he would definitely do it, but he's got to keep that PG-13, whereas DC, they're more willing to go R-rated, so when he got the Suicide Squad job, it was like, okay, well, I'm gonna make the movie that I want to make. Again, you can definitely see some resemblance from these two movies. The only difference is Suicide Squad was a big budget, whereas this movie was an indie kind of movie that didn't have a high budget in the first place, and it didn't even make back $600,000 at the box office. So it is a box office bust, but I don't think it was supposed to be anything huge in the first place, considering how short into his career as a director that James Gunn was at this point, because he just was getting started, getting his foot off the ground, and little did he know 4 years later that his big break would come with Marvel inside the MCU, and now he's like a go-to guy when it comes to comic book movies. And hopefully, even he said after he's done Guardians of the Galaxy, he'll be done with Marvel for a bit, but hopefully he can continue on with these DC projects and just continue to amaze. But overall, was a good one to me. I would definitely recommend. The critics gave it a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes, so again, nothing bad, nothing terrible, but for a movie like it was, you're not really expecting much from it, even though there are a lot of indie films out there that definitely do very well. This wasn't necessarily one of them, but I feel like it's gotten to a point where fans of his have definitely turned it into a cult classic. I mean, I'm a fan of his work, and this was my first time watching this movie, and I gotta say, once I started zoning out, he was able to bring me back in, and I never zoned out again. I was like, okay, this is it. Like, it's just weird how you go from, man, this is boring, to, holy shit, this is actually really, really interesting. I really, really like this. He just, I don't know, most of his movies don't start like that, so it was kind of surprising when I was like watching it, but then I had to realize what he was working with and what he was trying to do to, I guess, make it appealing to the audience in some way. So that's it for me. You can tell me in the comments below if you've seen this movie, what did you think of it? But again, I would definitely recommend you go watch James Gunn's official first superhero movie. Yeah, stay safe out there, wear your mask, get vaccinated, and I will catch you all in the next one.
Don't fucking touch my car again.
A lot of empty words, and I've already heard ain't gonna work tonight.
That is the last time.
About it anymore,
Frank!
'cause that ain't gonna make things
I'm going. That's not the kind of touching I meant.